Hello and welcome to this video. Today I am going to tackle one thing I mentioned in a previous video, and that is to make a bit more detailed 3D Pokemon card. Or I want to try out different techniques and things again, so I'm going to do 2 cards instead of 4 like the last time. And I'm going to see what I can achieve. I know it's gonna be hard because more details, especially also in the cards and stuff, means more teeny tiny pieces, but let's see what I can do. And I'm, as always, very careful with my blade, very slow. It's decently hard to cut the material that these cards are made of. But also when you cut them, they tend to delaminate like a tiny bit. Still don't know if there's like a technique to this. It's probably really just practice. But since this is only my second time trying this out, we shall see where I end up. One thing I did notice really quickly with this card is that definitely using a ruler can help. Usually when I cut thicker things like this, I try to freehand it because I just feel like I have more control. I did have a decent try at making the lines even. It didn't work out that well though. For the smaller pieces it did, but especially for the frame where there were thinner pieces, it just really didn't, so you know. I'm gonna change that for the second card or even parts of this card. But else the process is pretty much very similar to the last one, except for that I will need more cards with more pieces to cut out, since I'm going to try and also add this frame that's around there and a bit more of the things that are naturally 3D in the card. Now, like I did last time, I'm not really gonna erase the parts of the card. I know that a lot of 3D card artists use either pieces of card or some other material to create a little bit more of a gap between the pieces. The only time I'm going to do that, and I'm going to use the pieces of the original cards, just leftover pieces, since I have them and they have the same thickness all around, so they will be very useful for that. I'm going to use them just on the curved pieces, just to give them a bit of height, because it's harder to attach them else, because they don't really have any kind of flat surface that touches anything. But it's pretty much almost the same process as last time, just cutting out the different pieces of the little Pokemon, in this case Pikachu, and just of the background as well. I'm going to leave the rainbow as is. I thought about changing that, but it is so see-through. I think layering that up would look weird. So I kept it, and instead I'm just gonna do the foreground with the little bush and the mountain thing that he's sitting on. Another thing I wanted to try out is kind of 3D eyes. I saw some people cut out the eyes of the character and then use resin for the lower layer to actually achieve a more 3D effect. Some also put it on top, but I wanted to try the lower layer method since I think it looks a little bit better and less fish-eyed. In my opinion, I still think what the other people create is amazing. This is just my choice of style. And as you can see, I'm using watercolors to color the edges. So some people use black, but I really wanted to keep this light feeling of the card. The Pikachu here has more of a faint outline, more like a highlight, instead of actually having a real black or dark outline. So I wanted to keep that, so I chose yellow for that. And the rest I'm trying to kind of color match, just the green tones and the browns and all that. And of course I'm doing some texturing. I practiced a bit on the background where I knew it would be covered up, and then I went in straight with this tiny box stylus tool and added the texture on top on the layers that you would actually be able to see. And then it was time to actually layer the pieces. I'm going to try out 2 different glues. The one I'm using here is B7000, and it actually worked out really well, and I love the nozzle. I'm gonna try out another one again though, and you can see I may have put a tiny drop too much of resin. I will, if I ever try this again, definitely use a toothpick instead of the applicator. But yeah, it looks a bit weird, but it's gonna be covered up. And this is what I mean when I say I need to raise some pieces. For example, the bush here is a bit curved, so if I wouldn't, it would lose the curve. But I make sure to texture these pieces beforehand since they're kind of floating. The same thing I'm going to do with the body and the head essentially too, and this is where I have the eyes cut out, so hopefully this should look better in the end. There seems to have been a little bit of damage on the surface of the card, like on all pieces whenever I went over it with watercolors I could wipe it off if it was immediately. This one kind of created a little bit of shading on the face. I guess my Pikachu is just special, it has like a cute little mark on its forehead. Just a bit more of a shading spot. But yeah, I tried to use black watercolor. I should have maybe tried to apply it from the back a little bit more instead of from the front. But as you can see, it actually works out really well with the 3D eyes, and I think it looks super cute. You know, the shading actually kind of fits. It's like not too like off at all, so it's sad that it happened, but it doesn't matter. I could have just picked up another card and cut the piece out again, but I felt like it wouldn't be a problem, and indeed it wasn't. This glue actually dries fairly quickly, but not quick enough apparently, so, you know, while I was working and putting things around, things shifted a little, but in the end I think I made it work pretty well. And then after I assembled the Pokémon in the background, it was time to assemble the front of the card. And all I did here again was layer the pieces, apply one piece, apply the next piece, and so on and so forth. I had some spillage of this glue, but in the pieces where it really spilled, it was fine because it was mainly pieces that would be covered up by the outer layer anyways. And one thing I noticed is these cards are definitely not 100% even again. I struggled so much to line them up. In the end I went with the print a bit more than the side edges, just so, you know, my previous like cutouts would work well with that. But yeah, you know, in manufacturing, like, that's also how they get like their grades. They can be like a bit unevenly cut or like off-centered, and that's totally normal to happen, but in these ones it was definitely a bit more noticeable. I think they were from like a different cutter entirely, since they were like a bit different size also, but it really wasn't too bad, and as you can see, the card actually turned out decently cute. I also added some resin on the energy symbols, you know, the energy cost symbols for the attack and like general energy, and then I went on to the next card. And in this one I decided to tackle this Xatu. This one is going to be a tiny bit more of a challenge because it has way more like swooping details on the outside of the card, and I'm actually tackling this a tiny bit different in assembling it as I go. I usually like to have the pieces first to make sure I have everything, but in this case there were some pieces, especially on like the edge here, that were so thin that I just wanted to pre-assemble them. I don't know how the people managed to like keep not like bending or tracing any of these very thin edges. I couldn't manage it all on this card. In the end, it looks a tiny bit messier than the Pikachu, but that's mainly just on how I tackled the card. Like, it has some layers and stuff that work a little bit differently, like the frame on the Pikachu, I actually put that on the inside. In this card, I decided to put that on the outside more, especially with the silver piece. I just thought it would look better, and indeed it does. But you can definitely see how absolutely wonky some of the pieces were. It's okay. I work around it, and I still think in the end it looks pretty good. I definitely need to practice way more. But then again, I know that, as I mentioned before, some people that work on precious cards, they don't just use those precious cards, they actually get reprints of them on like a cardstock or something, and then just use like one card if it has foiling for that foiling that will stand out. Because, you know, some of these cards can be hundreds of euros or dollars, depending on the cards, you know. So it makes sense to actually use a print instead of wasting these precious cards. Even if it is for art, you know, the collectors are out there that love these cards, and of course it would be a shame to cut these up. So actually getting a print of them definitely seems better, and as I said before, I think they would have an easier to cut material also. I tried using like a stiffer like cutting mat, and the edges also still frayed, so having this like softer piece underneath, it's still like pretty rigid, but this softer like placemat actually helped my blade like sink in through a little bit better, so I could actually, you know, do these like tiny edges and like just poke the tip of the knife through it to like cut it, especially on the round over part. That worked out pretty well. Now, one thing this Pokemon has going on is tiny eyes, so I struggled a great lot to get this 3D eye effect. I think I still kind of managed, but it was definitely way more challenging. And this card has a little bit more layering going on again, and it's definitely a bit wonky. Also, the glue I use definitely does dry quicker, but you still can like kind of scrape it off, but it leaves a little bit of residue too. I think if I had to go back, I would definitely use the B7000 a bit more instead and just wait a little bit. I just have to be a bit more patient. For this card, I decided to do the texturing later because like I noticed, especially also on the Pikachu, that it just looks a bit better because you can kind of get the edges too and it like blends in a bit more. One thing I whiffed was some of this resin stuff on the icon, so I actually tried and redo it and yeah, it didn't work out as well, but I left it in the end because it didn't want to come off anymore. But here are the cards. Honestly, I think the Pikachu is my favorite of these two. It looks so cute. And besides like some unevenness on the edges cut-wise, I think it turned out amazing. As for this card, I still love it a great lot, but it definitely looks a bit less clean. If you look at it from further away, it definitely has a beautiful 3D effect and you cannot see the unevenness as much. I just really wished, you know, I had enough practice and I didn't like mess up the resin stuff as much. But overall, I'm again super happy and I learned so much from the first try and from this one, and I just love displaying these. In the future, if I can get my hands on some of my favorite Vulpix and Ninetales cards, I may trade those again. Maybe with a different approach, maybe with a little bit more practice, we shall see. But overall, it was so much fun doing these cards. But let me know in the comments down below what you think of them. And you know, if you have any ideas or tips and tricks you picked up on like any social media, if you watch these kinds of videos, feel free to share them with me. I always love to learn new things and try them out next project. And as always, I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!